Welcome to Speak with Eve. I'm your host, Eve Eurydice. Today I'm speaking with the writer Porochista Khakpour.
Any point, I just feel like you and I always talk like this, so it's great. Like, yeah, hit record.
Well, welcome to the show, Porochista.
I
We're
love
starting.
talking to you. Thank you. It-
uh,
It's always such a delight. This is a great excuse to just chat with you. So thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Well, we have so much to cover, but just as a quick
Yes.
introduction to my audience who hasn't heard our previous conversation, Porochista
Right.
Khakpour came to the US as a refugee from Iran. Her family fled the war and the Islamic Revolution, and she's a fellow experimental writer. First novel was Sons and Other Flammable Objects. She wrote The Last Illusion. She wrote the memoir Sick, which is a very interesting book that I'd like to go back to in this conversation.
Yeah.
And your new book now is Terrangeles,
Right.
which is the nickname of the area in Los Angeles where the Iranian exile community is centered, and it's a
Yeah.
satire. So it's kind of like it's your third novel, but it's unique. It's very campy and fun,
Yeah.
funny, and it kind of like makes fun a little bit of our reactions to COVID, and
Yes.
it talks about this dysfunctional multi-millionaire family of Iranians who live in like a
Yeah.
mansion and have 4 daughters who have a very active online life. And in summary, it's kind of a caustic, I would say, commentary on our era of like reality TV versus
Right.
stark reality and like
Yeah.
social
Right.
media versus actual media,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and
Yeah.
the challenge or the chaos of what's authentic and what is not authentic
Right.
in this moment in human history, which is unprecedented. So anyway, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure. Yeah, you said that so beautifully. Yeah, that those were definitely my goals with this satire. It seemed impossible to write about this period in anything but satire, you know? It's very
Yeah,
difficult to
yeah,
write earnest realism if you're going to write about like the madness of the last several years, you know.
yeah.
So
No,
much tragedy, but the handling has just been ridiculous on so many levels with inept governments, and then my diaspora community that's not necessarily my community because I
mm-hmm,
didn't grow up in the center of the west side. I was on the more east side of LA, that is a little bit more invisible when people think about LA.
mm-hmm.
But certainly I was a shop girl in Torongelis. I worked on Rodeo Drive. We would always go out to eat over there, and I have a couple of relatives that were very successful in the Torongelis world. So I was sort of inspired and anti-inspired by this.
I mean, I know it's about the Iranian. It's interesting because not much is written about the Iranian American community. But I think in general, as an immigrant, it's a commentary of the American dream, of
Yeah.
in this moment, of how much we kind of like have to give up, how much depth we have to give up, from our original native cultures in order to
Yes.
kind of succeed and excel in this more shallow, materialistic and late capitalist American culture.
Yeah. Definitely. It's
Yeah.
it's a real pact with the devil, it's very, very difficult. I mean, there's like only really one character, well, maybe two characters, a mother and the one daughter, Mina,
Mm-hmm.
that I really felt anchored me because I only really related to them. But actually, the bulk of my research had to be with like spending a lot of time on TikTok, spending a lot of time studying these content creators and influencers who just, they were really like, I worried about all of them. I would start
Yeah.
the months spent studying them. I would think, I'm so worried about them. Like, what's going to happen to them? Like, is this person going to be okay if we look back, like on them,
I worry
years.
about, I mean, the
Yeah,
OnlyFans,
yeah.
the millions of girls on OnlyFans, an
Oh my
entire
God, yeah.
generation that lives off the internet,
It's
and it's an
true.
extremely unstable way to make a living. But more than that,
Right.
it's a very unstable way to form an identity. Like
Totally. I mean, I was
that's who they know themselves to be in the world. So if we go
yep,
offline,
yep.
who are you? Well, they don't know.
I love that you brought up OnlyFans because I was just thinking about it the other day because I was thinking about doing an essay about some of my experiences like 20 years ago doing lots of like nude modeling and things like that online. And you remember that whole era of like
Mm-hmm.
suicide girls and all that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Remember that
Mm-hmm.
whole
Yes.
moment? It's
Yes.
about 20
Yes.
years ago.
Yeah.
And it's so funny doing some things with competitors of Suicide Girls. So I wasn't a Suicide Girl, but I was like a level, like, but it was a period where that was like very much something a lot of us felt we needed to do, and I have so many mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, I love that I felt like I wanted to celebrate my body, and I felt very connected to this community that felt safe to me. But the truth was, like, there was a very fine line and a very
Yes.
thin membrane between
Yes.
safety and no safety, right? And
Right.
we all took some risks, and some pretty horrible things were also happening. And a lot of the people that were involved in these worlds were predators,
Yes.
and we I don't know if we were in denial of that. I don't know
We
if it's
were.
so
We
much of
were
like
in
being,
denial. I
I
mean,
guess so, right?
100%. I think, because everyone around us was like, oh, this is freedom,
Right.
liberation or death. But
Yeah.
it's a very
Yeah, that's
thin line
true.
between, celebration and exploitation. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not beyond us to self-exploit. I mean, that's exactly like the
Right.
question about these armies of influencers and
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
online workers, sex workers or fame
Yeah,
workers
totally.
or whatever, commentators. Are you self-exploiting or not? Because
Well, yeah,
you're
that's it. It
programmed to,
just
to, to say what will go viral. After a while,
right.
you're gonna only say the things that will get you likes.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
No
thank
one
God
is.
our era was pre-social media. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know
yeah.
what would have happened if we were like trying to get likes all the time, right? I mean, this came up for me the other night when did you see Melania Trump's post about why I'm proud of my nude modeling? Did you see this very weird
No,
tweet she
no,
did?
no. I
It's a
have to.
crazy tweet, and like so many people are not on Twitter anymore, right? Because it's like X, and of course, but it suddenly popped up on my timeline. I was shocked. People were, of course, laughing at it, and I had a good laugh over it too. But it was like she was suddenly trying to own the narrative of people making fun of her nude modeling for so long. And she was trying to say, well, it's a very badly put together video, as you can imagine, right? She has all this like famous art in the background, like historic sculptures and famous art of like nude people, and she's trying to say like her nude photos are in that lineage, Obviously they're not, but everybody knows that. And actually she has said that she has been very ashamed of it. Like she's freaked out about people circulating it. Yeah, but it's also like very interesting because again, so many things come back to me. Like when I think about these things, I think back to like the problem here, and the problem really is to me like so much of American culture, because American culture does this funny thing where it'll make you feel like, yeah, you're free. This is great. Like
Mm-hmm.
self-expression, be
Mm-hmm.
yourself. But at the same time, it's an extremely punishing and puritanical culture,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
run by just like a worship of money, right?
Well, yeah, it's a delusion. We have this
Yeah,
delusion that we're
delusion. Right,
free
right,
because we don't have
right,
the tight knit community around us. So, like
right.
closely around us, we are free. There is
That's
less
true. Right,
family supervision or neighborhood supervision.
right, right, right.
But it is a very unforgiving culture because
Yeah,
it's unable to move on. Like the whole idea of
right,
America, if there wasn't a promise of America, it was that we would move on from the old world, and it won't.
right.
This whole empire stuff is going backwards.
Yeah.
This thing of like being the policeman of the world, it's so un-American,
Oh,
right? So
yeah, right.
everything that they were saying that they were going to do, whoever, the founders or the pioneers or whoever they
Right.
were, whatever aspirations they may have had, has totally been co-opted by the same interests that
Yeah.
control the rest of the world and control America
Yep.
even more. It's
Yeah,
like the
absolutely.
same old duality.
Yeah.
You take Trump and Melania. Okay, so they have both, they come from this world that you just described, the world we were
Right.
in New York.
Yeah.
And instead
Yeah.
of using their popularity, kind of
Yeah.
like integrate it,
Yeah.
it's like throwing us back to the morality of a patriarchy that is
Yeah.
dead, that's obsolete. Like there is no
Right.
going there. It's
Yeah.
it's just delusional.
So funny because it's like almost right, or they're so afraid of us or whatever it is, the radical left, that they actually are like courting fascism, and it's so sick. Because even when I was in Paris last week, I was talking to a lot of artists and some activists on the streets. I mean, I had really great conversations, and they were saying Paris is suddenly now like more full of police than ever, and everybody's worried that like Paris is gonna fall to like fascism.
Yes, yeah. We were
What is,
talking about the lack of imagination. If
yes,
there is something wrong with the present moment, the solution is to like return to the dark ages.
Yeah, yeah, literally. It's wild to watch. Like it's become this like contagious concept. And I don't know where, I mean, was it the pandemic, the early pandemic that made this more appealing to some people, or was it the Trump era? And it's trying to figure out what the point was where we got into this mess, because it seems like culture has really rapidly shifted in kind of a really scary way, but I can't pinpoint it. Can you?
No, I can't pinpoint it, but I do think it's a symptom of excess. There is just
Right.
an imbalance. You know, both sides
Yeah.
are in feverish kind of rabid
Yes.
right now.
It's true. Oh my
Frothing
God,
at the
yeah.
mouth.
Yes, yes, truly.
And
It's
those of us who
crazy.
like cannot honestly say, you know, I'm with one or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're kind of outside the narrative. No one
Yeah.
is representing us. We have to choose sides. The few people who seem
Right.
to represent us in the last two elections have been absorbed
Awful.
by the two mainstream sides.
So true.
Were invisible again.
Yeah, it's so funny.
Yeah.
It's like these parties are truly garbage. And so I was telling actually somebody, this young guy at a store today here we were in Perugia, and he was like a very young, seemed like he was young, you know, he was a student, he'd been a student, and he was really interested in talking to like an American writer about like what's going on in America right now. And I think he thought that I would disagree with him, but he was very nervous, telling me that he said, you know, normally I like Democrats. And I said, sure, I'm a registered Democrat. And he's like, but I kind of have a feeling they're also bad. And he looked really nervous saying that. I started laughing. I said, you're absolutely right. Like so many of the Democrat positions are no different than the Republican positions right now. And
Yes,
it's really
exactly.
an atrocity. And I don't even know what to do. It's like, do I just register as an independent now, or do I not vote?
I registered as
Oh,
an
that's
independent.
great.
I just changed my
Good for you.
registration away from the Democrats.
Oh, I love that. I know, because the Democrats are a disaster too now.
It's
Hideous.
unacceptable.
Oh, I love that you did that. Maybe I need to do that,
Yeah,
because
it
I really
feels
don't
good.
want to.
It does feel
Yeah,
good.
yeah, it's disgusting. I mean, this is just really, I'm trying to figure out ways for people to like actually evade taxes now as a political protest, you know, and throughout American history, people have tried to do this. So many people they've sent to jail for like long periods of time just under the umbrella of tax evasion. But I'm trying to consult with more lawyers on if there's a way to like popularize this. Yeah, it's giving me a little bit of a purpose, because I know, you know, obviously someone will say, of course, you're privileged. It's easy for you to go to jail or not. But I think jail is never, American prison, like Iranian prison, is never a privilege for anybody. It's miserable, but there's nothing else we can do, I feel like, at this point, you know. I think the only message you can really send this government is to also starve them the way they starve us.
Yeah.
And to say that like we are not funding this. Like I want to pay taxes for schools and to roads and things like that.
Yeah.
But I don't want to fund these absolutely like mass infanticide. You know,
exactly.
this sick, these military operations that are so evil, you know.
Right. The
so
military
evil.
industrial welfare, which is what we're doing. We're keeping all the multinational corporations profitable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's so profitable for them.
I mean, I
It's
think
sick.
no taxation without representation may be one of the ways that can unite the two sides.
That's true, because it's funny when I talk about it sometimes, a lot of different people approach me and they want to be involved in this. And I think it's really kind of exciting that there are people, like more people than I even thought, who are like, well, if I have to go to jail briefly, I'll do that. You know, and I think that can maybe it really could send a signal. The problem is, you know, you have so many people like I was even, or members of my family, when they're new immigrants to a country, they're terrified. You know, they don't want to be sent back to their own countries. You know, who knows, they might be like Iran and can't really go back there, right? So they are afraid to do anything that is supposed to be in the spirit of the U.S. anyways, to fight back, to have those freedoms, to like oppose your government.
Which is, which is really unique to America. I mean, to me, again, that's one of the fundamental differences of being an American. We have there is such a strong sense of the individual against the government. Whereas where I come from, people think of the government as very paternalistic. The government should take care of everybody. And also, there is very little taxation. So let's add that to the until a few years ago, until 2015, there was no real estate tax in Greece. So,
really?
And then the Europeans forced us to have like really, really minimal real estate tax, and everybody everybody is shocked. It's like, what? You're going to tax me for my houses and my earth?
Wow. Wow. I didn't know that. That's wild.
Yeah, so the purpose of the government is really to pay everybody money.
Right, right.
And the government gets it from like our allies. So we're like selling our allegiance to whoever will pay us for it. It's the lot of like, vassal states, which we have been.
And then meanwhile, like, in the US, like nobody has proper health care, and more people every day are now joining this, the feeling that the state, the condition I was in for many years, which was like severe chronic illness, endless chronic illness, a chronic illness that'll lead to another one, that'll lead to another one. And because you can't afford proper medical care, like you have to resign like I don't do disability. People have asked me why I don't want to be on disability in the US. And like, it's a very sick, predatory system. First of all, it's very hard to get disability. You have to go through years and years of paperwork. And then even then, once you get it, you can only make a certain amount of money. They need you to stay poor.
Yes.
In order,
yes.
This cap on how much disabled people can earn is like one of the most evil things I've heard of, because now disabled people can work from home. They can do lots of other things. They want to feel empowered. They want to feel part of society. But like, disability is set up so that you can never rejoin society again. It's just so
it's
cruel.
The same. Yeah, I have that same complaint about the UBI, the Universal Basic Income. Which, as you see, what happens when you accept the charity of the state agencies, you realize that it's not benevolent. It's very authoritative and disempowering, devaluing, diminishing. So it is not like empowerment. It is disablement. If you want to be paid to be disabled, the system will disable you.
It's such a weird circle then you go into, because I had an old student ask me, she was like, well, then so what's the solution? Like, what do you identify as? Like, a libertarian or something? And I said, not quite that either.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing really I just remember, like, ages ago, right? Even the 90s, early 2000s, it was easy to identify with something or another, right? You could say, this is what I believe in. And I think increasingly it's become harder and harder. And so maybe it's the most honest state of all. You're just an individual that agrees with some things, doesn't with others. And hopefully you have like-minded friends and you intersect with people that share your openness. But it's really become hard to join any sort of club or group or anything, because I feel challenged by it, but in some ways I also like it. It forces me to stand alone a little bit. And I am so communal in my spirit. I always want community, and I want people to, like, it's always been like something I really wanting in the US to establish in a way.
Yeah,
but
me
maybe
too.
It's not even, it's hard, because our cultures are like that, right?
Yeah, very communal cultures and very ancient. So not, communal in an endless way. So it feels like the only way to be. And then you come here and you're like, why are all the people, like, each one in their little separate homes locked up?
Exactly.
Where I come from, there is no locked door, and everybody's in, the houses are built on top of each other. So you're, in your space and you hear everybody's business. And you walk out and everybody's advising you about your phone call.
Right.
And everybody has opinions. And then you come to America and it's like, well, why would anyone tell you what to do?
Right.
Because they care. Because, like, they're not going to leave me in the street to die. That's why we don't have any homelessness. Because everybody's part of the whole.
Right. My neighborhood in Harlem it's one of the main reasons I still live there. I would have left New York a while ago. But there's a lot of that feeling in my neighborhood in Harlem. And it's like, it's one of the only neighborhoods in the US that really found that, like, there's definitely pockets of it everywhere. People are watching out for each other. There's an awareness of who lives on the street, like what's going on. It's really beautiful. And I love it. But it's so interesting. Like, everybody that I talk to, like, even about the election or so many things that are going on, like, everybody's just fed up. Yeah.
We have to find a way to put together coalitions, that are different from, like, political interests, because the political interests on both sides are just inevitably corrupted. I mean, there are good people, I'm sure, in both sides trying to do the very, very little that they could within that system, but there is so much money and there is so much ego. I definitely think that general celebrity culture is one of the cancers in the body politic.
Yes.
Yes,
definitely.
Just watching watching clips, from opera yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
And all these actors acting like they are the wise men of the world.
Oh my God, I know. It's ridiculous. But don't you love how Gen Z doesn't fall for it? I
Yeah.
love how the young people don't like celebrities. I think
Right, me
it's so
too.
funny.
Me too. I think
It's refreshing.
me too. I think between Gen Z and AI, when
Yes.
this generation of celebrities dies, most of
Yeah.
them boomers,
Right.
we will be rid of the worst, of that cancer.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
Gen Z, mocks everything.
Right.
Starting with
Oh my
celebrity.
God. They're so funny about it. I love it. I find it so refreshing how
Yeah.
irreverent they are and in such a smart way. And they're right. I mean, these celebrities are ridiculous. I remember about 20 years ago, I was doing a lot of celebrity journalism and I was being sent out all the time to interview these celebrities. And it was but it was really interesting because you'd go into it thinking like you could do some really fascinating forms of journalism. And in the end, all that these publications wanted was PR basically, because it was always tied to ads like that. And so you realized at the end of it was, for me, it was years of this. And it was just, I've just become part of this really vapid PR machine. And I would always hope like somebody somewhere could stumble on the first draft, which were very different than what editors would shape the pieces in. First I was very excited because I liked the subject. And then I was like, oh my God, this same thing is happening again. So it's funny, as an artist, I'm like, oh, there's so much I can do. But
yeah, as a human being, it's difficult to live in that super shallow lake. My homeland, at least, we're not gonna get hung from cranes.
Exactly. God. Oh my God. I'm worried. That's the only thing. It's the only thing about aging that worries me is that, because I actually love getting older. There is this worry of what is this society going to be like? We already do exist kind of outside of the creative people, but what is going to happen? Where this is going? What's the game plan with these 1% of the world?
Yeah. I mean, there is definitely a big push for totalitarianism of all sorts.
Right.
And I think that the internet has enabled that, made that more likely by making us all more alike. The more we kind of replicate each other, the easier it is for us to be controlled in greater numbers.
Oh, it's so true. It's so awful.
One of the solutions has to be, to train ourselves to live offline, at short notice. If we decide that this is becoming too much, can we survive offline? And that's a good kind of basic standard. Keep in mind, where would you go? What would you live off?
Right. Have you done it extended periods recently, gone offline? Because I'm thinking about it. I get worried about it. Have you done it?
I haven't. I do have, my place in Greece, which has water well and fruit trees and a vegetable garden and fish in front of me. I can survive there. It's sustainable for sure. And it's not really on Google Maps. It doesn't have a street name or number, so that's good too.
Incredible.
I know.
Right.
But, but I have to train myself to not be curious, to not feel, the compulsion to hear what's going on. And that I'm not so successful. I'm hoping, I tell myself that if conditions become extreme enough, and I'm forced to, that I will. But I think the crisis would have to escalate enough for me to feel that this is existential, and then I would do it. But just as a basic, survivor training or, rebel training, I haven't done it for long enough. I can do it for 2-3 weeks, but that's really short, and it feels very long to me. It feels so long. Imagine Gen Z, we have memories of a life before the internet. We know that we can live off it.
That's true. But also, why am I so hyper vigilant? And is that also part of what this type of society does to you? You become like a student of the news, wired,
viscerally wired to the internet life.
Yeah, it's really wired. It's like a hyper-vigilant codependence.
It's almost like the Neuralink. We've already been implanted with that chip. Not physically. It's almost like we are already carrying the chip of eternal connectivity. All kinds of fear of imprisonment or deportation, the word of the moment. Repatriation, or they have a new term that sounds nicer. Remigration, that's what they call it. Remigration. That's the like enlightened term.
I love that. It's funny, yeah.
So
But
you started being in an open relationship.
I've tried to like do many times actually, because ever since I was a child, I just loved the idea of, I don't even know how I initially learned about the fact that there were people in open relationships. I think it came from realizing my parents were very, in a very unhappy marriage, and they had tried to they even tried to divorce at one point. Even then, they didn't want a divorce. They stayed together. It was a really difficult household for me to thrive in. I mean, and I knew I wanted to be a writer at like age 4, so I already had a very serious writing practice in elementary school, and I felt like my family constant dramas was like really disruptive. So I had the sense of it, like the nuclear family was not going to be something good for me. I already felt like it didn't work in my own household. And I would go to my friends' houses, and that was an era where divorce was very popular on television, and it had become kind of like a new thing that was kind of cool. So everybody I knew, every young person I knew, kind of wished their parents would get a divorce. It was like the sitcoms, they were doing all the episodes about people being divorced. So I had become very interested in the concept of what if we didn't do this? First, I used to say, like, I just want to be single forever, but then I want to have kids, by myself. And then my parents were like, wait, no, maybe I want to have many partners. And somewhere in there, I came up with, like, an idea that, like, open relationships would be good for me. And this became an idea that I always wanted to create all through, like, my 20s, my 30s. And it really wasn't until my 40s that I found partners who were willing to try this with me. I had to introduce it, and people were somewhat resistant. And I actually think the women I know would be like probably way more amenable to it. But straight men that I was dating away, because most of the men I've dated have very complex concepts of their sexualities, and probably are more in common with me than they want to admit. I've always known I was bisexual. That was always a very comfortable identity for me, for the most part. A lot of these men, I think, happen for me now in the last several relationships where I said, hey, what do you think if we were in an open relationship? And oftentimes I've noticed I've introduced it at times where I felt maybe monogamy is making us kind of miserable. I think that's my underlying feeling. Monogamy is something that sometimes makes people happy, but more often than not brings them a lot of unhappiness. So I had a lot of failures of open relationships. In this recent case you're talking about, there was this really wonderful period where I thought it was working really well, and then only recently it sort of exploded, where I don't think he wanted to be in it anymore. Usually what happens with me every time is that, like, my partners will be using the option of the open relationship more than I will be, because I still struggle with chronic illness. I don't want to be in any sort of romantic circumstance or any sexual anything. I just want to be like by myself, especially when I great art. But a lot of the men I've been with have been very active. Like, they've been very excited. Okay, we're in an open relationship, I'm going to go out. And it turns out that they can't handle that, and that they realize that for them, there's a burden to do it. Like, now they have 2 people they have to worry about, or 3 people they have to worry about. And it's a patriarchal mindset, of course, right? Because these men will always take it on as like, oh, one more difficult thing on their to-do list, one more, even just the feeling that they have to take care of other people. Like, I know I've never asked that of anybody, and I know that my recent partner was dating didn't ask that either. But it's more like how they see their role in this world. Meanwhile, my gay friends have a much better time with it. A lot of gay male friends I have who have been such great open relationships. So I think it is also like the funny thing, like heterosexual open relationships to me have a lot more problems, and that's why they sometimes require a very intricate framework of like what is polyamory, and you'll read these books that are full of theory and some of them kind of look to me,
No. There are whole cottage industry, some successful,
right.
Men and women I know, self-styled coaches will spend their entire career, advising and counseling and suggesting methods to have some version of open monogamy, conscious non-monogamy, some combination of commitment and open sexual experience. And it's I agree. I mean, I think it's really difficult, partly because of jealousy. I think that jealousy is a real thing. We think that we are post human ownership. But it's still like a very recent, I mean, like slavery existed for 10,000 years, and it stopped making sense to us for like less than 100 years. So I think that deep down, this sense of I love you, therefore, I own you.
Yeah.
I possess every part of you. There is something very destabilizing for either partner. I agree with you. I hadn't thought of this before, so this is the first time really that this thought has occurred to me. But what you're saying, that men, ironically, even though they seem to profit, from the sexual aspect of it, where they have more sexual partners, more sex, are the ones who in the end turn against you, or turn against it, or turn against one partner, and somehow into a monogamy by default.
Exactly. I think men are scared of being alone way more than we are. And men tend to fall into more normie habits, I think, more than we do.
Yeah.
And part of it also is men are very communication. I mean, I just feel this obviously anecdotal, but every woman I know infinitely better at communication than men are with pulling off a successful open relationship. That's everything. And it's like, think about how for so many men, even the language of consent was like a new concept.
Totally new concept.
What are you guys doing? Consent is sexy. It's a beautiful thing to introduce into any sexual framework. Like, consent is really, to me, one of the sexiest things. Someone asked, but the same thing is, like, when I was telling my boyfriend, I was like, we could just have really good communication. We could decide how much we know. We can create our own rules. Like, maybe you don't want to tell me something, or maybe you do, or maybe I should know about this, or but we have to have an ongoing dialogue about it. And I think that was for him something that was a challenge, because that's not his comfort zone. He's not a person that's ever been really great at that. And I think he found it like tedious, maybe. But ultimately, I think it really went back to him wanting to recreate what he grew up. And I think so many men, even if they weren't unhappy families, the way like I grew up, they still gravitate towards recreating that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us want to break out of that. And that again, like, I think a lot of this conversation about patriarchy, right? Men benefit from those frameworks, and they benefit from those very simple power structures where they're at the homes and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they don't want to question it the way we do.
Yeah.
And that's very frustrating. But I found that when this open relationship situation came to, I think, an end right now, the communication is so bad right now with my partner that I don't even know if things have ended. But for me, they've ended in a way, right? Because I felt like I hit a wall with him, and I felt like, what more could I have offered there? And I realized I really actually felt good about this relationship ending, because I loved who I was, and it felt like I had finally done everything I could be proud of in a relationship. I'd shown up in a way I wasn't plagued with any regret. And most of my relationships in the past had a lot of regret about how I behaved. And I think that makes life very hard. But I think if we all could create for ourselves relationships where we feel good in them, where we feel like our behavior is our best self, it really makes the endings of things a little bit easier. Obviously I'm haunted by that good memory here, the things like that. But I also, because of so many years of chronic illness, I think I just have a much better relationship with the idea of impermanence. I didn't think I was going to be alive this long, even a few years ago.
Yeah.
I was very aware that healthcare was tied to like a crowd.
Yes.
It's bad. The industry.
No one does this. I mean, I don't think anyone writes books for the money unless you're already a huge celebrity, and then but that's not a writer. That's someone who is milking their fame in all kinds of ways. One of which would be publishing something.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
That's very interesting, though. That impermanence, and insecurity of disease, of disease, allows you to accept, decoupling, change, whatever, changing, rehoming, like all that stuff that is difficult.
The biggest challenge for me, though, like in this whole thing, is like I always want to be like best friends with everybody I break up.
Mm-hmm.
I want them always in my life and my community. I want the confrontation parts to end, and for like the happy community parts to kick in. But the challenge for me is realizing that not everybody wants that, and that like sometimes people heal with distance, and that's always been a very tough thing for me to accept. And I'm trying to learn to live with that, because for me, someone breaks up with you and they like block you on all social media or whatever it is, like that to me is really violent.
Yes, I agree.
But maybe that, maybe that's what they need, right, to get to some equilibrium ultimately, right?
To me it feels very, reactive and small, because you've shared so much time. You know so much about each other, so you already have the basis for a strong friendship. You already have invested in the friendship. So no matter what happens with, the dynamics of, sexual change or sexual possession or, you are definitely friends with someone with whom you have been in a relationship. You're definitely friends. You know everything about them. They know everything about you. You've seen them intimately. That's one of your closest friends. So kind of like throwing that out is definitely like brutal.
Yeah, so that's the really hard part for me. It's something I just hate it, and I just want like always to like go in my life some way or another, and to just figure out like. But I'm always trying to problem figure out, and maybe like I have to just let go of that. Because I think it's related to control issues sometimes, right? But more, I think the most immediate feeling for me is like back to when I was a refugee and really wanting community and feeling like community was so impossible in the U.S. And wanting a world like the world my grandmothers had created for themselves, that my parents couldn't even create. My parents, I felt like, were just kind of like flailing and kind of like falling short of this life that my grandmothers had. And they felt their lives were not easy by any means, but they had a deep, I still feel, I gravitate towards like youth all the time. I just love being around them because I feel like they've survived. And I feel like there is a air that a lot of older women have that to me is like the most optimistic thing in the world. I've always wanted to be an old lady. I always wanted to be like 80 years old. I'm just like that. I know I'm going to feel good at that age. Like, yes, there'll be aches and pains, there'll be problems, but I feel like that's like my real self, and I'm just trying to get to that. And I resent America for making me feel like I can't get to that age. But, my grandmothers were both in their 90s when they passed away. I just loved it.
Yeah, me too.
Were you close to grandparents or grandmothers?
Yeah, I was. And they did live, really long lives, healthy lives. They didn't really have anything, any disease that was diagnosed. And they, looked good. They didn't have wrinkled faces and destroyed bodies. There is something in the current system that's not working. But, I do think, I want to say that I think that you are like a natural community organizer. I don't think that it in any way ego-based. I don't, knowing you, I don't think that it's because you want control. I really think that you want to fix things from the best place in you, make things better. And I do look forward to knowing you in our 80s.
I think that's everything I feel so happy about these days. I feel like I finally know the people that I will hopefully always know. And
yes.
Actually, I don't really want new friends like these days. But it's like I have the right people in my life right now, and that's perfect. And I don't need to, it doesn't mean I reject new people that come in. I've become cautious because and also this whole last year really reminded friends matter to me more than anything, and that lovers come and go and bring a beautiful dimension to life, but they don't define me in the same way.
Yeah.
No,
I agree. I think like loyalty. Like you live long enough and you realize that true love is loyalty. It's someone who is going to be a loyal friend and will answer the phone and will not in any way avoid you, no matter what. At your lowest and at your highest and at your most boring and at your most interesting.
I love that.
Yeah, and kind of the whole idea of the community is the sense that we can take care of each other. So if one of us has more than the other at any point, to be able to share that without another thought, like here, this is what I have. My door's open. Come on in.
You think it's like a Gen X ethic? Because sometimes I think it's because we're Gen X.
We are, yeah.
So great.
Yeah, I do
I
think... I
love our generation.
I do too.
Yeah.
I definitely think that we're very different from the boomer generation, where they have like three houses each, and they will not share like in a shed. It's like, no, I'm renting them all, or I need them for my vacations, or you're on your own.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe they came from the scarcity, more of a scarcity mind frame. Whatever it is that got them there, it's not attractive. Just gonna...
It's so true. They're like kind of the worst generation ever, and they say such horrible things about younger generations. Like they think everybody else is entitled, but they're actually the most entitled of all. And they've had a very privileged timeline. You know, I think about how my dad basically was born both my mom and dad were born basically right after World War II, and then I mean look, they've had the best of Western civilization, you could say, in many ways, and
right.
Has more opportunity than so many people felt many eras of prosperity.
Yes.
And yet they have this disdain for everybody else. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
If I were a boomer, I would be like, I feel like I won the lottery, you know? There are so few generations now that can imagine like buying a house, having a family the way they did, you know, owning things the way they did. Yeah. So I really don't get it. Because the generation above them had so much love for everybody.
Oh, absolutely.
Silent generation.
Yeah. But you know, they they had to survive like a lot of horror. The generation before the boomers, and then somehow the boomers, you know, have decided that this was their own doing. You know, that thanks to their ingenuity, like extraordinary skill set, they happen to be prosperous, and now it's on us to keep it up. It's like it's conditions. You know, like the most basic understanding of how society works. You know, it's not your own hard work simply. It's the conditions overall that you happen to live in.
Yeah, exactly.
The one thing that I really resent them about is control on power. You know, I know what's right. And I'm going to hold on even though I can barely function physically, you know, and I will spend all of the money that I have on myself so I can earn like, you know, 5 more years of this life. Or, you know, if they do share the wealth, it's still like, you know, to create little copies of themselves.
Right. It's unbelievably selfish. Like they never want to retire. They never want to help others. You can really see it now. Because I always wondered what it'll look like when the boomers were really like at the end of their, you know, years on this planet. And I mean, I don't even think they're going to like bow down to death gracefully.
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, that's the most. That's the most. To me, this is the time you gracefully retire. You enjoy the money you made, the good life that you can have after whatever your working years, and you study philosophy because philosophy prepares you to die, and it teaches you like you know, it opens up your psyche and your mind. Instead, it's like staying on the same level of like control, ultimate control. And you look at the Senate, you know, the people in control of power in this country, which is the most powerful country, but also around the world, like the people in control, and it's shocking. Like they're all boomers, or their little effigies, you know, like people paid by boomers to represent them, right? Or
I think they want the millennials to be like them. You know, they've given up on Gen X and Gen Z, but they're trying to like turn the millennials into their double, and it's
interesting.
Really depressing. So I think they see the millennials as being more like aspirational in the same way that they were, like the way that, you know, I noticed this with my own students. A lot of my observations of millennials came from, you know, teaching millennials and then teaching Gen Z, and they were just much more conservative. I mean, like millennials just wanted to like be in the nuclear family as soon as possible. They wanted to buy a house and a car and live in a suburb. They just wanted very conventional life, and that's like when I suddenly saw like at these schools, like all these millennials loved being in fraternities and sororities, and I would tell them about how like when I was younger, like it wasn't cool to be in a fraternity.
No, it was so embarrassing.
Suddenly, I was teaching young people, and their dreams were to be in fraternities and sororities, and that's all they wanted. And I really wondered. I mean, that sort of conformity of social media that you're talking about, perhaps, or maybe a backlash also against what Gen X was putting out in the world. You know, they wanted to be so different than us. Yeah, and I think they saw like us as like, oh, backward culture, like people can't handle a job.
Well, yeah, kind of.
I love it. I love how Gen X is kind of mid generation. Love how much Gen Z adores it. I'd heard ages ago, I don't know who had said this, I'm sure a sociologist, get bond with the generation, you know, one removed.
Oh, interesting.
It makes sense, you know, because your kids, you guys, like the Gen Z, Gen X mothers who are creating these.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Gen Z are our kids, and the millennials, they feel to me very retro. Hopefully, you know, I'm waiting for them to have a revelation and look around and say, say, the old script no longer applies. We can pretend to play this part, but they don't make sense in the world we live in.
Like, I'm so confused by that whole trad wife concept is interesting. Like, I don't get it. So different than what we want. But
yeah. Okay, so let's say it's interesting. It's not real. It's a mock trad life. Only play acting, usually for the camera. Trad life was really, really tough. The woman had no participation, no agency. There was no birth control. You had no choice. It's different when you say, I make the choice to not take birth control. I make the choice to not have an abortion, and I make the choice to stay home and take care of the children, right? And of course, saying that in your 20s is very different. Like, will you still be saying that in your 50s? I doubt it. And the reason I doubt it is because we have choice. Trad wives had no choice. That's just like such a fundamental, extreme difference. To not acknowledge that, that women could not own property, that women could not, vote, that women could not disagree with those husbands. A long list.
Some of these women are like, it's a perfect moment for the kind of weird optic now that like abortion rights are being taken away and all these like crazy things happening in this country, which a lot of the world is astounded by. Like, how could America be making moves like this? It's like, it seems like it's sort of perfect, right? Because then I've seen some of these TikToks of these trad wife type women, who knows what they're really doing.
Exactly.
But they say stuff like, I'm glad we won't have abortion one day. Abortion was a terrible idea, and that women are not as smart as men.
I see that too. Women respond and make a video and they say, the greatest mistake ever made in this country was giving women the vote. How self-hating can you be? You're like completely delusional. You wish for time travel. So, we could throw some of these girls back 80 years and have them experience it for a month. Not more than a month. Like, just get bitten to an inch of your life because you looked at a boy who was not chosen by your father. Let's get you to experience being forced to marry a stranger who may be 30 years older, who expects you to have sex with them every time they feel like it. Like, they have no concept of what they're talking about.
No,
because they haven't experienced it. And the reality is that the majority of the world is still like that. It's still in trad patriarchy. It's not like we have completely left it behind. So it's so easy to take the wrong turn. That's what's infuriating. Exactly.
It's like there's still honor killings happening in Iran, as
honor killings, yes.
Women don't have any concept. They're provincial and they don't know it. They don't know, uneducated about the rest of the world. And so they really need to things like this without really understanding what the rest of the world thinks. You can even call it a movement coming out of like a lack of education. Also, the other funny part is so campy, really is camp.
Yeah, I do think that too. Yeah, that a lot of it is camp.
Wild.
I really don't believe that those girls will never use birth control under any circumstance or will not have a chemical abortion. They will not, without telling the husband or anyone else, pee on a test from Walgreens, and if they don't want to keep the baby, get a couple of pills. Are you kidding me? Who are you kidding? Don't sell me that story because I am not buying it.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's so true. That's the thing. Remember, like years ago, like if there was a situation like that, people would have thought, okay, these women are being abused, and okay, if there's this society of abuse, we're going to send the FBI over there and shut it down. But it is wild time. It's like every other day I have like a whole new idea for a book, a new project. There's so much comments on and so much to take in. But the speed of which these things are is also very manic. And I have like a million entries that I want to write from just the last few months, and I can't even begin. It's like, where do I start?
Yeah, I agree. Like, that's why satire made sense for you, because with satire you can just go through it relatively quickly, but to actually investigate a topic like this and go back and give the comparisons and give some data and do a historical analysis and kind of explain the invalidity of all of this takes time. And by the time you do that, there'll be like 5 other trends that are even more laughable.
So I had to make it a period piece in that way. But I was, right now we're working on like adapting it in like a film version, but like the producer is interested and she and I have been working on it, and we're trying to have it in like 2024, but like flashing back.
Okay.
So like only challenges like genocide in the background, awful that whole thing that just some people can tune out, but some of them can't. I feel like the West is divided right now in terms of the people I'm very concerned about what's happening there, and it became like delusion to me, like just being able to like shut it out.
She's writing about 2020 because kind of like the greater world was in hibernation, everything was suppressed, so you could focus on the shenanigans of this family and flesh them out without getting, in too much into what was happening in the world around. But I mean, how can you talk about 2024 without the shock of both of these, wars, two permanent wars supported by all powers that be in the world currently, looking to never end. As far as the West is concerned, no one is actually promoting a solution. That was inconceivable even in 2021. I would never have thought that there would be war in Europe again. The Middle East, both of them are so late 20th century that I thought we had evolved a little past that. Tells you that we're deep in the same really ugly spot. All of these trades, the EU and the UN and all of that stuff is further bureaucratic control mechanisms, but they have not met the purpose of their creation, which was basically to somehow guarantee a modicum of peace in the world. What? And now we're waiting for China and Taiwan. I mean, if something like that were to happen, it would be a three-front permanent war in which pretty much everybody in some way or another is involved.
God. And I think China's also been very open about that happening, so I think that's going to happen. So you're right, that's like the final hong of these like major world powers and their ambition just getting in there. It's just so unsettling.
And the way that we are anesthetized because our entertainment, we somehow think of it a little bit TV wars rather than real wars. And so the reaction is, unless you know people on the ground or unless you have some kind of skin in the war, sort of personal understanding of war and genocide, or have people who have been there or are from there, unless something like that, then it just becomes not much different than entertainment war.
Some days I feel like because I grew up with my first memories are of war and revolution and all that, but sometimes in times I can feel myself get to a calm place because it's familiar. My challenge in my life is actually times where things are good, but at the same time, I'm like, I hate this like feeling of complacency. And I've been asking people, like, I want to ask you too, like what's keeping you together right now? Like, have you found ways to be hopeful, or what are the things that like are keeping you together? Like, I really don't have a great answer to this.
Yeah,
I'm like running out of things. Coping
like
reading and writing, and like different things like exercise or on reading and writing these days. I'm very distracted. I found one thing that's been helpful for me actually. It's been very challenging for me to afford therapy. Like I know exactly the type of therapy I want to go to, and I know exactly the kind of budgets I would devote to it. But I end up follow a lot of like online therapists. Instagram and TikTok, and now my algorithms are very good. And I sometimes put them on my social media. I had a friend of mine who's like a brilliant writer, one of kids, and the other day he had seen like some of these TikToks I'd put on, and they were just about ADHD. And I thought about how ADHD became more popularized in the last few years, and so many people realizing that like it means something different than what they thought. Like it's a much bigger category than people realize.
Oh yeah.
So that things like that like have been a little bit consoling for me, because I've tried to figure out a practice that remind myself to stay centered. But the biggest problem for me is like being so powerless.
We are definitely powerless. I don't think people, like 99.9% of us are powerless. I'm not sure who is powerful. Yeah. Even the people who are writing code, and are, like working on OpenAI or whatever, they're powerless. 99.9% of us are just repeating and spewing our pre-written lines of dialogue, playing parts just like our ancestors played parts, but they knew it. They knew the script because they were repeating the script of their previous generation. We think that we're actually original. I think that we are also like controlled, pre-scripted, and replicating the behaviors that like the overall system incentivizes. It's really hard to be original and not be insane. Not be senseless, right? Not lose the capacity to make common sense. So I think that when so many people are indifferent to the reality on the ground, they choose the reality of the internet. It becomes harder to organize communities around some kind of like new common interest and gather enough momentum and enough numbers where you feel like, oh, I can actually make a difference. I can sacrifice my comfort because it is for the greater good. It will give me a sense that I will do something bigger than myself, so it's worth whatever I give up. But if you don't have that, then you kind of like focus on your own little well-being.
Right. So often some of us have become so good at predicting America's twists and turns.
Yeah.
Dive Hotel, I stayed in Paris. It has incredible history. I stayed there for years. An amazing older art critic woman. She's been living there for years. And I just ended up bumping into her. And it was like late at night, and it was like all of us was like in insomnia mode and just talking about the world. And all of us kept coming back to the fact that we can't imagine what life will look like in year future, and that we'd all been kind of confident in our ability to do that.
Yeah.
Right? The whole pact of being alive is that you can die at any point. It can be very sudden. Things always surprise you, right? But
yeah, I mean, that was the whole idea of the avant-garde, like an artist who is, the artist can be ahead of the rest of the community.
Right.
Light path toward the future, but it is getting very murky.
Have you noticed people getting more interested in afterlife stuff? In my circle, there's been a lot of interest in like near studies and afterlife theory, and I wonder if part of that has come from people being like a little disillusioned with this world and trying to imagine.
So disillusioned that they're looking to the afterlife. That's so medieval. I mean, that's the definition of the Dark Ages. Life is so terrible. We live our lives for heaven because we've given up any hope of like pleasure in this life. So everything is for whatever happens in the afterlife.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. It's the most medieval thing ever. Of course, going in that direction in some calls online, I found it fascinating. I didn't know this, dystopian feeling that everybody hit a wall a little bit with like what the future could bring. Like the most supposedly enlightened in your society to come to those types of conclusions. I often believed in cycles. Culture goes one way, then it goes another, and highs and lows. Really, you can't look to these politicians for that. I mean, I guess it comes down to us. Like we have to be the change. I've also seen say wonderful things recently about how like maybe we don't need presidents. We just need more like community organized. I think that would be so wonderful.
Yeah.
Everything was at these local levels, and you have community organizers everywhere, and like that to me seems like a very good model. I don't think the federal government or state governments really do anything other than like hold people back.
That was the dream during the pandemic with all the community, the DAOs, people coming together and creating a DAO. Also like, van life, but somehow by 2024, we seem to be thrown back to very materialistic, non-humanitarian priorities. Yeah. And I do think that could be because of the wars. When the Ukraine war broke out, I think that was a cue for a lot of people that you have been naive. We're not where we thought we are. We are not progressive. And then seeing our representatives be pro-war and pro-aggression, that I think was also a letdown. So a lot of that constituency of people who were quit the system, quit the mainstream job, go back to nature, all of those kind of positive instincts that came out of the COVID pandemic and the lockdown have been pushed aside. I think this election will make a huge difference one way or another, depending on how it will go. Yeah. I have this feeling that something's going to happen the first quarter of next year, 4 years to the day of the COVID outbreak, which would be like next March. Something's going to come up again that that will make us have a reckoning. We're not out of that crisis. We're all in that illusion, like Neptune in Pisces, kind of dazed by this illusion of well-being.
Do you have a prediction of who, I know we go through for the election, but do you have a thought of who you think will win this election?
I thought the Democrats would win, but these 2 assassination attempts have humanized him. I'm no longer sure. I think another assassination attempt may make the difference. Throw the election to him. I mean, it is really fascinating how when Trump's fortunes are really negative, he gains, it counterbalances his, worst aspect. I will say this, I do believe that if he gets assassinated, he will become a martyr. I feel strongly that, he's like stronger dead than alive. Because all his many flaws and insanities and excesses and all of that disappear the way we do with our dead anyway. We tend to idealize them. I definitely think that he's more effective dead than alive. I'm not sure that the story of like trying to assassinate him is over, even though they're telling us today again that he has the ultimate protection, and what this is something going on.
This movie has got too many plot lines.
Exactly. This movie, whoever wrote, yes, in terms of, speaking of reality TV, like your book, his reality TV, except from when he decided to like leave The Apprentice and run for president until this day, in like September 2024, has been so well written from the point of view of like reality TV drama.
Oh my God. It's everybody can't look away.
You can't look away. I know.
Well, and I'm convinced that's what Kamala Harris is trying to do too. Like she's trying to do these interviews where she she talks about the gun owners that trying to have names. It sort of shock value for people that like sort of look really human. It's really interesting to see people's reaction to that, because I think years ago people would have hated that.
Yeah.
But in the framework of the election and the framework of this moment, people are like, oh, that's great. It sounds wonderful. It's very, very interesting. Like, I'm going to have a lot of questions for people after this election's over. I've been watching people and being like, you're telling me this is really what you believe in. So then we have a lot of conversations we need to have after.
Yeah.
With gender values.
We don't know anything about her anymore. Honestly, I've no idea what she's going to govern. I have no idea. But I do agree with you that they are, trying to be also reality TV candidate, because they're dealing with it from the other side. When she speaks, she has this intense emotion. So like you think she's almost going to break into tears. But what she's saying is not that emotional, but the way she describes it is like straight out of the post-event interview, on reality TV shows, where like they discuss what happened and their voice cracked. Why are you so emotional about this? I guess they know what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like show business. I mean, politicians are like the ultimate of show business, really.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
But money as actors, or top actors, I guess. Like, I just don't get the idea of who would want to be a politician in this day and age.
I mean, I think Trump did it. I'm sure he did it for the fame, because he's been about fame his whole life, and he's been very good at that. He's used his fame to make money. His whole business scheme is, I'll promote your stuff because I have celebrity. Pay me, and I'll put my name on like your goods. So the more famous I am, the more you pay me, because I access more eyes. So I think his motivations are kind of naked. But people like Obama, Kamala, even Hillary and Bill, there is a list of these people whose motivations, I think, can only be explained as psychological trauma driven. Otherwise, it makes no sense why you would be willingly attract so much hatred and defamation, all the bad juju imaginable to yourself. To me, it's unthinkable.
Well, some people describe like these parties as cults. It's very interesting. Like, it makes a lot of sense to me.
It's cult.
Like, they're kind of stuck in these families and these systems, and things like Epstein, I feel like are very clarifying episodes in this history now we have with like Diddy, They told everybody finds out who Diddy was partying with. Diddy partied with Trump. He partied with like Bill Clinton. He partied with the same people that Epstein partied with. They're going to find out that once they really go deep into the Diddy case, that it looks a lot like Epstein's case. And in fact, the Epstein thing is still ongoing, right? Because they won't release.
The Epstein thing is the story, in my opinion. That's the story. We haven't got it. We are not getting it. We're getting all this stupid drama about, these politicians back and forth. That's the story, 100%. And the Diddy thing is the same thing. That's a story that, I don't know if they're going to suicide him too. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, if they find him, because they put him on suicide watch, which is like what they did to Epstein. And I think, it's like their way to
die in jail. He's going to have have to, because I think actually the Hamptons world Diddy was part of, I still remember I knew friends that partied in that world.
Oh, wow.
That world was so inclusive of so many rich people. I mean, it was even more popular and more powerful than Epstein's world.
Really?
You know, Epstein's world was a little bit older, you know, but Diddy's world in its heyday included like every generation. I mean, he was like, it's so funny because he was not very successful as a rapper. He was a decent producer, but he was very good at being a rich, influential person with power, and especially in New York. And so it's like, him and Epstein are very interesting.
No.
I actually met him.
You met him?
I met Epstein, in the year 2007. There's actually a photo of me from that night.
What, with Jeffrey Epstein where? In New York?
In New York, yeah.
Wow.
It was an after party. My old friend, Dharma Mongala, I think I told you about, there's that whole awful Netflix series, Bad Vegan, about her, tell her own story. So I'm very glad that she's going to do that. But she's been a long-time friend of mine since 2005. And so I used to go to her restaurant all the time in New York. She has like incredible raw foods restaurant, and many famous people would go there, including Bill Clinton, including Giselle, Tom Brady, all these types of people. And one evening, I guess it must have been, again, my ex-boyfriend remembers it very vividly. 2007, we just lingered after, as we often did, because we'd get free food and drink. And then we would often go to whatever the next spot was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the part where I'm hanging out there, or I think it was afterwards at this place called the Norwood Club, which I think still exists to some capacity in New York. I don't know.
Norwood?
Anymore. Yeah, I think it's called
Never
the
heard
Norwood
of it.
Club, if I'm not. It was like this weird secret club, townhouse looking thing, and it was near Union Square, so it was very centrally located. So that you had to know someone that had a membership there. It was one of the ridiculous New York clubs where both paid, more than I make in a year to have a membership. And I can't remember who the friend was. I had one friend I remember, but showing him the photos that Sarma had sent me from this one summer night that we'd gone out. And he said, do you remember who we talked to that night? And the minute he said that, it was boom. It was there was this older man. He was really charming. And he said, yeah, I remember he was with a woman that didn't talk much. And I was like, oh my God, Brian, were we hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell that night? And he said, of course. Do you remember? And it was just wild. We had been drinking a lot that night, is why I'm a little hazy on it. But what I do remember is how charming. He's such a good listener.
Wow.
We felt really safe talking to him for hours, which is the scariest part of all, you could imagine somebody, and Brian remembers that he said, come out with us, we can do other things, or he's inviting us after another thing, but also extending an invite to us to God knows where that summer, and we just never reconnected with him. We were struggling artists in Brooklyn. Okay, let's stay in touch with this kind of rich patron. We were both struggling, and he had kind of the energy of a guy that was really interested in younger artists who were struggling in New York. And it's just oh my God.
Yeah.
When you think of how close these things have been, the Diddy thing too. I was a hip hop journalist for years in the late '90s, early 2000s, and it's I ate at Diddy's restaurant multiple times. This restaurant was an amazing hangout for so many people. It was in the same circle of a lot of them hanging out with, and so New York's become kind of a funny place when you think about it, because it's so liberating for so many, right? But it's also ultimate death trap.
Yeah.
So,
it's good to be an outsider, I must say. You definitely are an outsider. But I can't imagine the toxicity of being an insider to these things. The way that the sexual human body, or the beauty of the young human body, is monetized, demeaned, and dehumanized. It's just unfathomable to me. It's unfathomable to me that they don't for a moment stop to think that there is a psyche in this, living human body, basically.
All the people they're surrounded with, that's the part that always shocks me too. So all these people actually had tons of accomplices. Because there's so many people that just didn't want to speak up or say this looks wrong, or like, not like these people, on some level they act alone, but in another way they have like a massive group of enablers.
Right, yeah.
And these people are walking free among us. They're just wild.
Yeah, and this is the definition, this is a lot of people's definition of a good time. Get a bunch of nubile boys and girls and we have a good time. They're like thinking, feeling, fully embodied persons with opinions and reactions. This kind of like disembodied living bodies, the way they're thinking of them as not ensouled. Treat human beings the way that they have been treating so many young people, unless you're presuming that they are soulless, that they're born without spirit, without essence, right? I mean, otherwise, I can't think how that works. It's kind of a division, and a compartmentalization of like within every human being. Excess wealth tends to do this. Excess wealth corrupts. I mean, there is no exception to it. Money is amoral, which means it's immoral. When you have so much more money than you have use for, by default, you become immoral. It's just excess. Anything to such an excess is toxic. That's the disease.
And I think it goes back to like in our cultures, always there were cautionary tales about. All the ancient cultures tell you this. Like, if you take money alone, there's going to be very deadly things that will happen.
Yes, all of our wise people, all of our thinkers, all of our holy people, all of our prophets, everybody said it. You look at why did like royalty fall? Because they had such excess of power and wealth that they abused it in the most flagrant ways. This is again what we're talking about, and nevertheless they're covering it up. They have been, whoever, I don't know who they is, but the authorities are covering it up. Imagine what it would be like if they published everything that they got from Epstein and Diddy.
Right. I think that, people now like make fun of people act at things like release the names and things like that. Everything becomes meme-ified like these days. But I think it's a really intelligent question that people are asking online. Like we should know who is in there. We should know what these people should be held accountable. Like 100%. I mean, these are huge predators who have had no consequence. And I'm sure many of these young people felt the way that I did after I was raped and assaulted, 2 years in a row when I was very young. Like, I didn't want to be alive.
You don't want to be alive. You don't want to be touched. You don't trust. I mean, you lose so much of your, of the beauty of your humanity. What's the point of having laws? The basis of being a democracy and the basis of being a community is that we've agreed to obey certain laws together at the cost of our own freedom. I may want to do X, Y, Z, but I don't do it because I've agreed to be in this group that thinks that, that considers X, Y, Z illegal against the law, even if I think that it should not be illegal. Or maybe it would serve my personal good, but I have to put the common good first because that's the agreement of citizenship. If you do not stick to that agreement and apply the law to those, the wealthy ones, then the rest of us find no reason to participate in this democracy. And we go back to this conversation we started with about why are we paying taxes? Why are we participating in such a system that's false? It's a false premise. If the law isn't treating us all the same blindly, then there is nothing we have.
Right. Oh, I feel like we're so lucky that we are able to. I wish everybody can become contagious for other people to like look into this thinking, even if it's not natural to them. Because if you have more people being able to like wrap their heads around this way of, even my family, like my parents, this is very foreign to them. When I started those, they just are like, oh, you've lost me completely. But sometimes these days, I feel like people are getting closer, maybe that's one great of online discourse, right? That it can include people more easily. But it's like, you really have to let people understand this stuff, because I think that's one very grim and scary thing is that people have lost a sense of their agency. If you really, truly lose that, ultimately everything is lost, and then all we are is like puppets that are controlled, and we have no say in anything in our own future.
Yeah. That's a good place to close for now, hoping that we can reassert our agency and find ways to, be a community with each other and speak up for ourselves against those interests.
Totally. I think we should revisit this also, like, after the election. I would love to reconnect with you after that.
Okay, let's do part 2 in November. And we will analyze what happened. Sounds good.
Truly, there's so few people I want to talk to you about this, because like people in my own circle, I'm like, oh my God, so many people right now. You're like you and one other friend I have. I feel like we're on the same wavelength politically. So I'm just like, I need to know what happened, and I need to talk to you.
Okay, it's a date, and everybody can listen in.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for today, Porochista. I always love talking to you. And everyone out there, thank you for listening. And we apologize for our iffy Wi-Fi. It's going to be a little iffy, but Porochista is in a 15th century castle in Italy. And everybody, I'll see you next week.
Thank you.